Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025, and this week we're going to be answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week, we take our newsletter news stories from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays and turn those into three different questions we see formulating around some of the general themes from those news stories. And we cover stories in the newsletter, everything from social media news, which includes upcoming webinars, online blogs, AI reports, all sorts of online tools where social media is being used in international education, to a U.S. roundup of kind of the top news in international education, and obviously there's been a lot of that in the last few weeks. And then a solutions central section that focuses on the positive things that we see popping up and ways that different institutions or countries are adapting their policies to meet changing demand. And finally, we have a global roundup that looks at what international education professionals are dealing with in other major destination markets around the world. So we take those news stories from Monday and we come up with our three questions on the news on the Midweek Roundup here on Wednesdays. So if you haven't already, you can get the email version of our newsletter delivered in your email inbox Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern, and I'll be dropping the link to that in the chat so that you have that for your reference. That email comes out again at 9 a.m. We have also a LinkedIn version, and with the LinkedIn version, that is available at 8:30 a.m. on Monday mornings Eastern Time. And between the two of those subscriptions, we have now over 2,500 subscribers that are getting that newsletter in their inboxes or notifications every Monday morning. So very pleased and humbled that so many international educators are taking advantage of that newsletter as part of their weekly international edification. So as we do each week, the questions we ask here are meant to go next level. We give our hot takes on Monday in the newsletter stories, but here on Wednesdays, we really focus on discussing some of the topics a little bit more and what they actually mean and what some of these news stories mean, new policy changes that we're hearing about, what all of those have to do, how they might impact us on campus in international ed circles in the United States. So the first question is, how should your messaging change for Gen Alpha? And I focus on one of these topics like this because, frankly, we need something kind of to distract ourselves from the daily barrage of political stories and visa revocations and SEVIS terminations that have been plaguing campuses across the country, over 1,300 as of last week, that have had SEVIS records terminated or deleted. There's some debate as to what actually is happening with those students. The greater majority of these deletions or terminations on the SEVIS side are down to an AI bot that DHS has been using to scour government records and for any infractions of anything from parking tickets to speeding tickets to DUIs to other criminal offenses, however minor. Are making it are getting caught up in these filters, and then there have been auto terminations happening when flags go up for any international students that are part of those of the SEVIS database. Their SEVIS records have been terminated, and the fact that there's only been 1,300 maybe students out of more than 1.1 million is still an absolute microcosm, less than 1/10 of 1%. Of international students, 1/100th of 1% perhaps, of international students are caught up in this so far. And certainly any student that's getting caught up in this, it rocks their world completely. And their DSOs on campus, their international offices who are there to support them are feeling the brunt of that pain. I get that, totally understand it, and it is a daily concern for many campuses across the country. Who's next? Who's going to get caught up in this next? But the numbers haven't gone up dramatically in the last few days, so hopefully the worst is over on that front. We can all be hopeful about some things, I hope. But in terms of what we're talking about here with this question, and back to the Gen Alpha question. And this is particularly personal for me because my son is a ninth grader, and that's the focus of these of the two articles of the Gen Alphas. And typically the Gen Alphas are 2010, 12 area birth dates that are now just in entering high school, that are soon going to be beginning their college searches and finding the right programs for them. So in university studies. So for my son, Gen Alpha, the description that the article uses, and we're talking here first about an Encora article that has some data that they pulled from 2025 to versus 2022 for high school students to see how their perspectives have changed. That for college-bound students and what the priorities are. The expectations for personal growth goal for college and in terms of what they most are looking forward to is becoming a good citizen and all that that might entail. That is one of those major things that it seems to be going up for ninth graders. So the Gen Alphas now in 2025 seem to be ones that are much more likely to be concerned about using college as a way to become a good citizen. Much more likely, like 4 or 5% more than their peers. More than, say, for example, seniors in high school, which are at 21%, expect college to help them become a better person, good citizen, and then up to 25% of Gen Alphas in ninth grade now. So what does that mean? It means that they're maybe not as unlike Gen Z, which are the students we've been dealing with for the last few years that have a fairly high interest in social impact and civic growth in their college years, that the transition from Z to A in terms of generations, that Gen Alpha's high interest in advocacy is perhaps a little bit overblown. That they still want to change the world, but it's not, college isn't their primary way of doing that, apparently, according to the data that's popping up. So in terms of the perception about the necessity of college amongst ninth graders, over 80% said it's necessary to find a good job. 79% say college is necessary to earn a good salary. 78% to have a long-term career. But only 55% say college is important to have a meaningful life. Now that's important. That's a nice, interesting distinction there. A meaningful life to make a positive impact to the world. College is only seen as by 52%, a very slim majority, as necessary to have a positive impact on the world. And to be an informed citizen, only 51% would think that college is needed in order to do that. So maybe these students seem to have a better perspective on, well, it can help, but it's not the end all and be all of whether I become a good person, good citizen in this life by going to college. So what the bottom line of this Encora survey suggests that for Gen Alpha, that outcomes come first. And that's not out of line with what we've been seeing internationally over the last few years, particularly since the pandemic, where value for money is certainly something that domestic and international audiences are much more sensitive to, that we've seen a diversification of where students are willing to go for their post-secondary education if they're looking outside their home countries, and they are considering more diverse range of countries, lower cost options that are closer to home, where they can still do an English language degree in a country that may not have English as a national language, but has many degrees offered to attract students from a wide range of countries. So since English is considered the lingua franca for higher education, and certainly the most marketable language for across the globe. So that's outcomes matter first. So the cost, value, and return on investment are the kinds of things that would be messaging that makes sense for Gen Alpha and certainly their parents. And that improving communications outcome metrics are key for remaining relevant for this new generation. And certainly that has been my conversation and my experience, particularly on campuses where I've been doing consulting jobs over the last few years. That outcomes is a message I've been pushing home, and specific international outcomes even more so. Every college has that figure of 85 to 90% of our students have jobs within 6 months of graduation, but is that necessarily what Gen Alpha wants to see? They want to get specific, and they want to know, hey, what's my first year salary out the gate? What's my net spend in the 4 years of education that it's going to cost me? Parents are certainly going to be more concerned about that than the students themselves, but that's certainly a piece of that puzzle. And the last other main outcome from the article is that social impact is still important, but don't ignore that from what you can do. We talked last week about how sustainability is becoming a much more significant driver for international students, and in terms of what your campus is doing to show its sustainability and its policies and impact on the environment, on net carbon impact, on going net zero carbon impact. All of these things are on their list, and perhaps sustainability is one of those things that they will be very concerned about, because in terms of the world that they're inheriting from us. And certainly careers are a way to show that, academic programs that reflect that, campus policies, all of these things are what students expect to see. And in fact, we saw in that Study Portals report last week that students will actually favor a campus for its sustainability more than they will, and choose a campus for sustainability over its rankings. So that may be, who knew that sustainability would be the death knell of rankings? There's always going to be some that will apply to only top schools no matter what, but this is opening the door for quite a wider range of things to impact what students are making their decisions on. So great article from Incora highlighting the kind of differences in Gen A, that's Alpha, that's just coming up, and Gen Z, that is reaching the tail end of their time in the college search process. Now, a little bit deeper dive specifically on international students is happening Tuesday, the 29th of April next week by Keystone. They're doing a live webinar on understanding your future students, recruiting Gen Alpha. So I do encourage you all to register for that. I'll be dropping the link to that in the chat as well. So in terms of where we are in the United States right now, we all have had some conversations over the last few weeks related to lawsuits and status of students on our campuses that might have been affected by some of the government changes, or the SEVIS terminations and visa revocations. Again, a much smaller number that are impacted by the visa revocations. What we talked about last week also is that a visa being revoked doesn't automatically mean the student is deported, because a visa is only the key that gets you into the country. It doesn't have anything to do with your status while you're here. That is determined by your I-20 and your SEVIS record, International Student SEVIS record. So the question we're asking now, as our second question of the day, is how do we interpret the U.S. government's legal arguments in some of these cases that have been going around? There's been ones in New Hampshire, in Michigan, in California, Pennsylvania, and most recently Atlanta that have gotten a lot of press, and we'll share some of the results of those, or at least where they are in the cycle, that are a little bit troubling when you really dig into the weeds as to how some of these decisions are being made. We see in government's enforcement action on schools, universities, and international students has really picked up. We've seen that in the last 3 months. There's no doubt about that. And the visa revocations, which are again a smaller percentage of the overall students impacted by this, are fairly small. The deleted records or SEVIS terminations are significantly more, but as we just talked about earlier, they aren't always for very legitimate reasons. So a parking ticket, a speeding ticket is not grounds for losing status, right? I mean, and where as a DSO, as an RO, as a PDSO, anyone involved in SEVIS at all on the institutional side knows that status violations are reported in SEVIS. When students fall below full time, that has to be reported. When they, if they don't update their address within a certain amount of days of that change happening, that needs to be reported. When they have an OPT job, that needs to be reported as well. All of these things that's what SEVIS exists for. It's been that way since post 9/11. That SEVIS has played this role in documenting where students are. The most highly monitored group, non-immigrant group in the United States, because there's over 1 million of them in the U.S. And that some institutions, and we've seen this with Harvard, are going down a very dangerous path. Their PDSO and the university received a letter last week that we highlighted in the newsletter on Monday of about 10 or 11 demands from the government, from DHS, for information on their international students, those that were involved in protests, those who have been found to have been committed violent acts. All of these things that a PDSO is now being asked to provide, and they gave them until I think next Wednesday, I think, was the deadline they had in that letter. So anyone who's in the ISSS SIRS United Facebook group certainly knows that has been making the round and scaring the crap out of a lot of people on other campuses. And again, the campuses that are being targeted right now are the ones, the elite institutions like Columbia was, like Harvard was, many of the other Ivies that have significant government grants that they receive, on top of their extremely large and sometimes obscene endowments that they use to help fund a lot of their financial aid for students from the U.S. and around the world. So what the government's doing is obviously putting the pressure onto these elite institutions that, frankly, let the anti-Israel, pro-Gaza, pro-Hamas riots run riot over the last year and a half on campuses, that put Jewish students on campus in danger, physical, mental, other dangers that they faced, being able to actively be students on their campus, and having them fear for their safety. That the administration's coming down hard on those schools that certainly their presidents demonstrated before Congress that they couldn't define anti-Semitism, and really had no interest in shutting those protests down until the public pressure ratcheted up to a point where they had to act. So now from this administration's point of view, it's payback time. So they're taking out their big stick, and they're beating down the institutions that did not do a good job on campus and protecting their Jewish students. So in terms of the legal cases that have been pending, Harvard certainly is one that's going to knock on for a while. They're suing now suing the government for what the extreme steps that the government has taken to restrict them and their funding and other means, and they're threatening to withdraw ability to enroll international students. Again, that was part of this threat. The Department of Education is now requiring, it just rolled out today in Karen Fish's Latitudes article, newsletter about Department of Education's investigation of Harvard and some of the funds that it's received from the government. So there are some real targeting attempts by the government on those that have not done a good job of protecting its students. So that's the focus of the government's ire against institutions, but we are most directly impacted by its impact on our students. But can you imagine a university like SEVIS, #2 in the world, who has well over 10,000 international students on campus? Imagine that institution not being able to enroll international students anymore. That sends a message globally that would shape the foundations of international student recruitment, frankly. It would certainly impact the applications going to that institution, and from abroad, they wouldn't be able to accept them anymore. But would it also have a chilling effect on students that might have normally gone there, or gone to other institutions like it, that might say, well, I might not be even able to go to the U.S. because the schools I'm considering are potentially going to lose their ability to enroll me. So there's a very serious set of cases that are going to be coming down the pike in the next few weeks that are going to really put pressure on institutions, and ideally no one would think right now that Harvard would let it get to that point, but we don't know that yet. The government likes to play hardball. That's what the Trump administration does. So it waits, everything's a deal to them in negotiations. So we'll see where this all goes. But let's shift gears and talk on a couple of other legal battles that are going on. One of those is where the visas that have been revoked, and again, we're talking about in the media, these terms, SEVIS revocation, visa revocation, and SEVIS termination are oftentimes being used interchangeably, and those aren't necessarily connected. If a student's visa is revoked and they're put in deportation hearings, that's something different. And some of the very few number of the 300 that Marco Rubio mentioned about a month ago are in that boat. It's probably just a handful. But certainly those that have their visas revoked, they can't leave and come back. They'd have to get a new visa and try and get a new visa and try and come back in. But most people aren't going to do that if they even have the possibility of that happening. So there were a group of students, over 100 students that in Georgia that had filed a suit that the Trump administration had illegally terminated their visas. And again, those are likely the SEVIS record terminations rather than visa revocations. So this was part of an AAUP suit that where the ideological deportation policy phrase was coined to refer to what the government's trying to do here. That the government countered in their filings there that no such policy existed, and that argued that the case should be dismissed because the plaintiffs failed to prove they had standing to sue. But the states, this is the AAP one that received 86 different amicus briefs from universities, that the visa revocations inflict concrete, measurable harm on the states impacted. So the policy which strips them of their status, which again is not entirely true, it has raised a lot of protests on campus around the country, and those that are obviously impacted significantly. The reasons for that, the ones in this suit, it doesn't get into that level of detail, but it might be those. It's more than likely going to be the ones that had these frivolous things like parking tickets or speeding tickets that are raising their concerns there. But we did see, and this is the one that really we saw the success in New Hampshire, where a judge put a stay on the deportation order, or to have the student's SEVIS status reinstated. There was one in Michigan, in the Eastern District of Michigan. There were 4 students there, 2 from China, 1 Nepali, and 1 Indian student that filed a lawsuit against DHS, saying that their immigration status in SEVIS was illegally terminated without sufficient notice and explanation. So that's what happened. These SEVIS records were just terminated automatically based on these filters that this DHS social media or AI bot combing government records for any infractions, whether they're resolved or not. Any student that had a red flag was immediately had their SEVIS record terminated. So the judge in this case, and here I want you to listen to this one. This was the argument from the U.S. attorney in this case, that according to the record, let's see, none of them have been charged. This is from their lawyers. None of them have been charged with, let alone convicted of any crime in the United States. These 4 that were in this boat, none had violated any immigration law, on which their status is dependent, nor have they been active in on-campus protests regarding any political issues. So that's the statement from the students' lawyers. Now the judge in the case, it turns out, has accepted the argument that the U.S. attorney had made, and that they are, and I'm trying to get the exact wording that was used here, that their response was an emergency motion. Let's see, here we go. Yeah, basically the government said the students have criminal records, but did not provide the details for those records. The DHS searched, and this is the government's case, the DHS searched criminal records for each of the plaintiffs, and criminal history matches were returned for each of the plaintiffs. And so it says criminal history matches were made. So, but there are students, lawyers are saying that they had not done that. So that the criminal records, the students' attorneys were saying, referred to, that the government is saying that they were criminal, were detained for, were actually alleged domestic disputes. So the government's case is really reliant on something that says that, well, just, and the U.S. attorney said that the students had that just because their SEVIS record was terminated doesn't mean they're out of status. That's what the U.S. attorney said for that in this case. So that is just absolutely laughable. I've had a number of people comment on that one on my LinkedIn post on that this week, and it's just absolutely crazy to think that the government is now actually believes what they're telling the judges. The sad part about it is the judge in the case accepted the U.S. attorney's view that they weren't necessarily out of status. It was just a computer database. It doesn't mean you're out of status. And ask any DSO, any PDSO, RO, ARO that question, and about if they're out of status in SEVIS, they're out of status in life. Is that the case? Yes. And what does that mean? They can't be a student. They can't have any of the benefits of an international student. They can be a student perhaps, and a lot of universities are allowing those students to continue, but they can't work while they're on campus. They can't receive any other benefits that are related to their status while they're here, like OPT or CPT, any of that. So it does put the students in a very unnatural box. So that the judge accepted that as the rationale is pretty bizarre, and hopefully that'll get overturned on appeal. So, last question of the day: does China's travel advisory really say what it means? Now, for those who aren't familiar, last week the Chinese government, about 10 days ago now, they issued, the Chinese Ministry of Tourism issued an advisory urging Chinese students to exercise caution when considering certain U.S. states, in particular Ohio, as Ohio had passed SB 1 a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, that had two restrictions related to China. One, that all partnerships or activities with Chinese institutions need to be reported, which all of us do anyway. It's part of our requirements for reporting agreements. We have to do this. And the second one was no gifts could be received from China. And that's probably the most offensive thing for Chinese organizations, institutions, governments, that they can no longer give gifts or have 1,000 talents programs or any of these types of things that impact what an institution reports. So, as a result of that warning, of that travel warning that the Chinese Ministry of Education, not Ministry of Education, but Ministry of Tourism put out, that kind of sent a chill through any, particularly for institutions in Ohio, any potential future new agreements or expansions of existing partnerships that we might have had in behind the Great Wall. So we had one particular program, won't mention the specifics, but that was going to be launching this summer. It was an existing partner. Day after this announcement came out from the Ministry of Tourism, even though it does not specifically say don't travel, institutions don't sign new agreements or do new programs, this partner institution said unofficially, we're going to have to press pause on this new program because of what the Ministry of Tourism has just put out. So it's not a prohibition, and one commentator, David Weeks from Sunrise International, had said, well, it's mild language, but the reality is it has impacted what institutions are doing in China and could have significant damage longer term. And again, that warning came out the day after Trump refused to remove the extra tariffs on China. And we see today, Wednesday, the 23rd of April, that those tariffs are in process of final negotiations between China and the US. So we'll see what happens there. But a lot to talk about every week this week, but every week this time of year. But we're certainly going to keep you in the loop through the newsletter and here on Wednesdays with what's happening with our country and our international education profession here in the US. So thanks everybody for joining in, and we look forward to chatting.